Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today we're advocating the second half of Chapter 34, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Shadow of War, in Bailey, Kennedy, Tony's The American Pageant textbook.
And today, once again, we have a special guest with us. Madam, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Flapper Girl from Chapter 31.
Flapper Girl, will you start us off?
In April of 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, and then Netherlands and Belgium. The Nazis then moved into France, who fought for a whole 6 weeks before surrendering. Now, the only democracy left in Europe was Great Britain. All else was under the Nazi boot. Roosevelt began preparing for war. He called for an expansion of the Navy and Air Force, as well as a new conscription law to increase the size of the army. In order to strengthen the entire hemisphere, Roosevelt stated that Latin American countries could now share the Monroe Doctrine with the United States, which basically meant that all would work together to keep the Nazis and Japanese out. Frank, how was Germany treating its Jews?
Well, Jews in Eastern Europe were frequently attacked, and additionally, after Nazi leader Joseph Goebbels gave an instigating speech, the worst attack occurred as thousands of Jewish shops and synagogues were ransacked. This attack was later known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Many Jews tried to escape from Europe, but most were denied entry into Cuba and the US because of immigration laws. But after news about Nazi genocide spread, Roosevelt established the War Refugee Board and saved thousands of Hungarian Jews. In total, very few Jews found refuge in the United States. But Abe, can you tell me what US policy was towards Britain at this time?
Yes, Germany began launching bombing raids against Great Britain, and as civilians died, sympathy grew. Moderate isolationists spread the concept that by arming Britain, the US could fight for democracy but also stay out of direct involvement in the war. Roosevelt put this idea into effect by selling Britain 50 leftover destroyers from World War I in exchange for access to 8 different military bases. This act, though condemned by isolationists, provided the first crucial step towards proper military aid for England. So, Flapper Girl, could you tell me about the election of 1940?
The election of 1940 faced off the Republican Wendell L. Willkie against the Democrat Roosevelt. The Republicans branded Roosevelt a dictator since he was running for a third term, and they also condemned the New Deal. Roosevelt and Willkie agreed that Americans had to support democracies against Hitler, and they both promised to strengthen defenses and stay out of the war. However, most voters believed that should war come, they wanted an experienced leader in charge. Thus, Roosevelt won the election of 1940 and entered his third term. Frank, did FDR find a way to increase aid to Britain?
Fortunately, Flapper Girl, he did. Roosevelt still faced opposition from the isolationists, but managed to circumvent their neutrality legislation through the construction of the Lend-Lease Bill, which allowed countries like Britain and the USSR to accept military aid with the vague notion that they would return it after the war. This bill allowed the US to arm the enemies of the Nazis while never sending their own troops into harm's way. At war's end, the Lend-Lease Bill had granted over $50 billion in military equipment to nations fighting against the Germans and Japanese. It was becoming harder than ever to keep isolationists in this atmosphere, as the Germans began using more and more submarine attacks against US shipping. But Abe, did the European leaders and the US have a plan for after the war?
They did. It all started because Hitler and Stalin never trusted one another, and eventually in 1941, Hitler attacked the Soviet Union to seize its oil and its resources. Roosevelt promised to aid the Soviet Union, and he gifted $1 billion in Lend-Lease. Hitler was halted by both the Soviet army and the deadly Moscow winter. Also in 1941 was the Atlantic Conference, during which Roosevelt and Churchill endorsed the Atlantic Charter. There were several key aspects of the charter. 1. It argued for the rights of the individual rather than the rights of nations. Second, it promised self-determination, or the right of a people to choose their own form of government. Third, it declared disarmament. And fourth, it provided for a new League of Nations, or a new permanent system of general security. In the end, however, many American isolationists and those opposed to Roosevelt condemned the Atlantic Charter. So, Flapper Girl, how did America move closer and closer to war?
America began ferrying its merchant vessels to and from Britain with destroyer escorts, And in 1941, destroyers were authorized to attack any U-boat they saw. Later that year, Congress allowed merchant vessels to be armed for combat and allowed them to transport weapons to Britain through the war zone. Frank, what one fell swoop brought the U.S. into the war?
Excellent question, Flapper Girl. Let's start with some background. America was shipping steel, oil, and gasoline to Japan. And even though this trade was highly unpopular, Roosevelt refused to enact an embargo for fear of inciting Japan to attack the Dutch East Indies. However, in 1941, U.S. imposed an embargo on Japan, but offered an opportunity for limited trade if the Japanese would clear out of China. Roosevelt intercepted Japanese codes and knew they were going to declare war, but he expected an attack in the Philippines. However, on Black Sunday, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and destroyed much of America's battleship fleet. America thus declared war on Japan and Germany and Italy the following day. But Abe, can you tell me what were the long-term implications of America's transformation from a bystander to an aggressor?
Of course. Till the last hour, Americans had little interest in joining the war as belligerents. But the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor that claimed the lives of 2,400 Americans cemented America together in a full-fledged war effort against the Japanese. Germany and Italy then made up America's mind by declaring war the following day. Thank you for watching. Please like,
comment,
and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys next time.